Snow had been falling for 11 hours straight when the last street light in McCall, Idaho flickered and died. It was the kind of storm that didn't announce itself politely. It came in from the north like something ancient and angry, swallowing the mountain town whole, burying roads under 3 feet of white silence, cutting power lines like thread, and pressing against windows with a low, constant moan that made even the bravest people double-check their locks and pull their blankets a little tighter. Most people stayed inside that night. Most people were smart enough to. But Samuel Carter was not most people, and on that particular Thursday evening in January, Samuel Carter was not trying to be smart. He was trying to disappear. He had walked out of his front door at 6:47 in the evening. No coat zipped, no gloves, his old navy pea coat hanging open at the chest, the same one he had worn for 40 years, the one his wife Eleanor had patched at the left elbow twice without him ever asking her to. He had not taken his phone, he had not left a note, he had simply walked out into the storm, turned left down Old Lakeshore Road, and kept walking. He was 70 years old. He was tired in a way that sleep could not fix, and for the first time in a life defined by mission and purpose and the unshakable belief that a man's duty was to keep moving forward, Samuel Carter had decided he was done moving forward. Nobody would miss him tonight. That was the thought that had finally broken him. Not the stolen money, not the empty house, not even Eleanor's absence, as devastating as that still was after 6 years. It was the silence. The particular silence of a Thursday evening when the phone does not ring and the mailbox holds nothing but bills, and the only sound in a 3-bedroom house is the furnace clicking on and reminding you that you are still, inexplicably, alive. He had been a Navy SEAL for 26 years. He had served in Vietnam, in Grenada, in the Gulf. He had carried men out of places that had no names on any map. He had buried friends in soil that did not belong to them. He had come home 4 times to a woman who always stood in the same spot in the driveway, just past the mailbox, waiting, as if she had never moved the entire time he was gone. Eleanor. God, Eleanor. She had been gone 6 years. His son lived in Phoenix and called on Christmas if he remembered. His daughter had her own grief, her own distance, her own life that had quietly drifted beyond the orbit of his. His savings, 40 years of careful, disciplined saving, had been systematically drained by a man named Victor Hale, a smooth-voiced financial advisor who had spotted a lonely widower and seen an opportunity. The house was nearly gone, too. Papers had been drawn up. Deadlines had passed. Samuel had not fully understood what was happening until it was almost too late, and by the time he did understand, he found he didn't have the will to fight it. A man can survive a great many losses. Samuel Carter had survived more than most, but there is a particular kind of loss that does not announce itself as loss. It creeps in quietly, the way the cold crept in under his collar now, slowly, patiently, without drama. It is the loss of the belief that you matter, that your presence on this earth changes something for someone, that if you were gone tomorrow, someone somewhere would feel the shape of your absence. Samuel Carter had stopped believing that sometime in November. By January, he had made his peace with it. He walked for 40 minutes in the dark and the snow. His fingers stopped hurting around the 20-minute mark, which he recognized distantly as a bad sign. His boots were soaked through. The wind had picked up and was driving the snow sideways now, and he had to lean into it to keep moving, which struck him with a grim, familiar irony. Even now, even trying to stop, his body was still fighting forward. Old habits, old training, old bones that hadn't gotten the message yet. He made it to the edge of the old highway, Route 55, empty and white and silent as a held breath, before his legs finally gave out.
He didn't fall dramatically. He simply sat down in the snow the way a man sits in a chair he knows well, and he looked up at the sky, which was invisible behind the clouds and the snow and the dark. And he thought about Eleanor standing in the driveway. He thought about the first man he ever carried out of combat, a 22-year-old kid from Tulsa who had grabbed Samuel's collar and said, "Don't leave me, don't leave me, don't leave me," until he didn't say anything anymore. He thought about his dog from Vietnam, a big shepherd named Atlas, who had slept across his feet every night for 2 years, and once, on a trail outside Da Nang, had stopped dead and refused to move and saved 7 lives because of whatever it was that dogs know that men don't. He thought about all of it, and then the snow began to cover him. Lieutenant Commander Ava Morgan had stopped at the Ridgeline Cafe on Route 55 for one reason only. Titan needed water.
She was driving back to the base after a family visit that had gone the way family visits sometimes go. Politely, distantly, everyone saying the right things and feeling the wrong ones. She was 35 years old, a Navy SEAL officer with 11 years of active service, 3 combat deployments, and the kind of quiet authority that made rooms rearrange themselves around her without anyone quite understanding why. She was not a woman given to sentiment. She had trained herself out of it, or believed she had. Sentiment got people killed. Attachment was a liability. She had told herself this so many times it had almost started to feel true. Titan sat in the back of her truck, his massive head resting on the center console, his amber eyes watching her with the patient, unblinking attention that had always made her feel uncomfortably like he could read her thoughts. He was a 4-year-old German shepherd, military working dog, certified in search and rescue, explosive detection, and combat tracking. He had saved her life once in a courtyard in a country she couldn't name in this story. He had saved 3 other lives in a building in a desert she still dreamed about. He was the best soldier she had ever served with, and she had served with exceptional soldiers. She pulled into the cafe parking lot, filled his travel bowl from a bottle in her bag, and watched him drink. When he finished, he lifted his head. His ears went up, not the alert he made for commands, but something older, something animal and urgent. He turned toward the far end of the parking lot and made a sound she had never heard from him before. Not a bark, not a growl, something between a whine and a cry. "Titan!" Her voice was steady. "What is it?" He pressed against the window. His breath fogged the glass. He turned back to her once, just once, with an expression she would spend years trying to describe to people who asked. It was not panic. It was not excitement. It was something closer to desperation, something that said, "This is not a drill." She opened the door. He was gone before she could attach his lead. She ran. He led her across the parking lot, past the snowbank at the edge, down the slight slope toward the highway shoulder, and then he stopped and began to dig. The snow was deep and the wind was loud, and at first Ava saw nothing. And then she saw a hand. An old man's hand, knuckles white, fingers curled, barely visible above the white surface. "Sir!" She was already on her knees beside him, already brushing snow from his face, already pressing 2 fingers to his neck. "Sir, can you hear me?" His pulse was there, faint and slow as a distant drum, but there. Titan did not wait for her instruction. He lay down against the man's side, his full, warm body pressed against the old man's chest, and he stayed there, his great head resting over the man's heart, his breath coming in steady, visible clouds in the frozen air. Ava called 911. She covered them both with the emergency blanket from her pack, and she sat in the snow beside a man she did not know, watching her dog keep him alive with nothing but warmth and the stubborn refusal to leave. His name was Samuel Carter, and he did not speak for the first 18 hours.
The hospital in McCall was small, and the storm had complicated everything, but the hypothermia was treated, and the danger passed by morning. Ava sat in the waiting room through all of it, which surprised her. She had intended to leave. She had told herself twice that she should leave. Each time she had looked at Titan, who sat beside the closed room door with the focused stillness of a sentry, and she had sat back down. When Samuel was moved to a recovery room, the nurse, a kind, tired woman who had clearly made exceptions before, allowed Titan inside. Hospital policy did not technically permit it, but Titan sat at the bedside with such dignified, heartbreaking patience that the nurse simply shook her head and let it go. Samuel woke in the early afternoon. He stared at the ceiling for a long time. He did not ask where he was. He did not ask how he had gotten here. He turned his head and looked at Ava, and the look in his eyes was not relief. It was something more complicated. The look of a man who had decided something and found the decision unmade for him. Ava said nothing. She had learned in years of operating in high-stakes silence that sometimes the most powerful thing a person could do was simply stay in the room. Then Titan moved. He rose from his position at the foot of the bed and walked slowly and deliberately to Samuel's side. His full, warm body pressed against the old man's chest, and he stayed there, his great head resting over the man's heart, his breath coming in steady, visible clouds in the frozen air. Samuel turned away.
Titan did not move. 60 seconds passed, maybe more. The room held its breath. And then Samuel's hand, slow, trembling, uncertain, like a man reaching towards something he was afraid to want, came down and rested on top of Titan's head. The dog closed his eyes. Samuel's jaw tightened. His throat worked. He stared at the far wall for a long time, and when he finally spoke, his voice was barely a sound at all. "I had a dog like you," he whispered. "In Vietnam. His name was Atlas." A pause so long Ava thought he might not continue. "He saved my life on a trail outside Da Nang. Stopped dead in front of me. Wouldn't move. Turned out there were 3 of them waiting in the trees ahead." His hand moved slowly through Titan's fur. "Never got to say goodbye to him. They shipped me home before—" He stopped, pressed his lips together. "Before." Titan moved closer. And Samuel Carter, who had not cried at Eleanor's funeral because he believed a man in uniform did not weep in public, who had not cried through any of the 11 deployments or the losses or the long, hollow years that followed, Samuel Carter began to cry. Not quietly, not with dignity, with the full, heaving, terrible grief of a man who has been holding something enormous for decades and has finally, in the presence of a dog who asked nothing of him but to be touched, set it down. Ava looked away. She pressed her hand to her mouth. She was not, she told herself, going to cry in this hospital room. She was wrong about that. It took 2 days for Samuel to tell her the truth about the storm. She had not asked directly. She had waited. And on the second evening, while Titan slept across his feet and the winter dark pressed against the window, Samuel looked at his hands for a long time and said quietly, "I wasn't lost out there, you know." Ava said nothing. "I walked out on purpose." His voice was steady now, tired but steady. "I had it all worked out in my head, clean, simple, no mess for anybody." A pause. "Turns out there wasn't anybody to make a mess for anyway." The words landed in the room like stones dropped in still water. Ava felt the ripples reach her. "I had a good life," Samuel continued. "I want you to know that. I'm not a man who forgot his blessings. I know what I had. I know what I served for." He looked at Titan. "I just got to a place where I couldn't see what was left to serve for."
Ava thought about what to say and discarded everything that came to mind. Finally, she said, "He found you, Titan. I didn't see you. He did." Samuel looked at the dog sleeping across his feet. His expression was beyond what words are equipped to carry. "He wouldn't leave you," Ava said. "Lay right down in the snow next to you and just stayed." Samuel nodded slowly. He looked at Titan for a long time. "Atlas did that once. Slept on top of me when I had a fever in the jungle. 103 degrees. Everyone thought I was going to die. The ghost of something that might have been a smile. Dog didn't get the memo." What followed was not a clean or simple rescue. Real healing never is. Victor Hale had not disappeared. He appeared at Samuel's house 3 days after Samuel was discharged, with papers in hand and a lawyer's smile and the particular confidence of a man accustomed to winning by exhausting people who were too depleted to keep fighting. He had chosen Samuel with care, an isolated widower, no close family nearby, a man whose trust had been slowly cultivated over 18 months before the money began to disappear. He did not expect to find a Navy SEAL officer standing in the driveway. Ava had heard the whole story by then, the drained accounts, the forged signatures, the deed transfer papers that Samuel had signed without fully understanding, in a fog of grief and loneliness that Victor had expertly manufactured and exploited. She had spent 2 days making calls, speaking with a JAG officer she trusted, and connecting Samuel with a veterans legal advocate who had seen cases like this before and was quietly furious about every one of them. When Victor pulled his car onto Samuel's property that morning, Ava was standing at the front door. Titan was beside her, not straining, not barking, simply standing, completely still, his eyes fixed on the man getting out of the car with the focused, unblinking attention of a soldier who has already assessed a threat and is simply waiting for the order. Victor stopped walking. He looked at Ava. He looked at Titan. He looked at the legal documents in his own hand, as if they had somehow become unfamiliar objects. "Mr. Carter isn't available," Ava said. Her voice was calm and even and contained no room for negotiation, and neither is his property. I'd recommend you speak with your own attorney before your next step. Victor Hale drove away. He was arrested 6 weeks later on charges of elder financial fraud, forgery, and exploitation of a vulnerable adult. The accounts were frozen. The deed transfer was invalidated. The process was slow and imperfect, and the legal system moved the way the legal system moves, heavily, with friction, but it moved. Samuel's home remained Samuel's. The money was not fully recovered. Some of it never would be. But Samuel Carter still had his house, and for the first time in a long time, he had something standing beside him that felt like not being alone. But justice did not fix the darkness. That was the thing Ava had not anticipated, though perhaps she should have. You could arrest a man, you could restore a deed, you could win every legal battle available to you and return every recoverable dollar, and the darkness would still be there, waiting at the edges of a man's nights, patient as it had always been. 6 weeks after the storm, Ava had been granted a temporary extended leave, circumstances that her commanding officer did not fully understand, but approved without excessive questions, because good commanding officers sometimes know when not to ask. She stayed in McCall. She told herself it was temporary. She told herself she was monitoring the situation. She was not entirely honest with herself about her reasons, and Titan, for his part, seemed entirely unbothered by the arrangement. He slept at Samuel's feet every night. And then, one night, at 2:14 in the morning, Titan woke Ava. He did it quietly, a single paw on her arm, a low, urgent sound that brought her from sleep to standing in under 3 seconds, because 11 years of combat deployment had permanently rewired her response to alarm. She followed him down the hall without turning on a light. Samuel was sitting in the armchair by the window. The room was dark, except for the pale blue light of a winter moon on snow. He was holding a photograph. She could see it in his hands, though not what it showed. He was absolutely still, the stillness of a man who is somewhere else entirely.
Titan crossed the room and sat beside the chair. He pressed his head against Samuel's chest, right against his heart, and he exhaled, a long, slow breath, and stayed there. Samuel's hand came up. It found Titan's fur, and something in him came undone. He wept the way men weep when they have finally stopped fighting the grief, not the crying of sadness, but the crying of surrender, of letting something go that has been clenched for years, of finally opening a fist that has held so much loss for so long that the hand had forgotten what open felt like. Ava stood in the doorway. She did not go in. She understood with the instinct of someone who had spent her life in service to others that this moment did not belong to her. It belonged to an old man and a dog and the photograph of men who had not come home. She found out later what the photograph showed: 8 men in Vietnam, 1969. Samuel was the youngest. 3 of them had been killed within the following year. He had carried their names for 50 years. After that night, something shifted, slowly, imperfectly, in the way that real things shift, not dramatically, not all at once, but with the grinding, quiet persistence of seasons changing. Spring came to McCall the way it always does, reluctantly at first, then with a sudden, overwhelming generosity that made the long winters seem almost worth enduring. Snow melted off the mountains in silver streams. The lake thawed. The trees remembered what green was. The world, which had been white and still and silent for so long, began again. Samuel Carter began again. It was not a transformation. It was not a movie moment of sudden revelation. It was a Tuesday morning in April when he called a veterans outreach organization he had heard about from Ava and said in his quiet, steady voice that he thought he might have something to offer. It was a Thursday afternoon 2 weeks later when he drove himself to the community center in McCall for the first time in years. It was the look on the face of a 24-year-old recently discharged Marine who sat across from him in a folding chair and said, "I just feel like nobody gets it." And Samuel put his hand on the young man's shoulder and said, "Son, I've got all day." 3 months after the storm, Samuel stood at the front of a veterans outreach gathering in the McCall Community Center. The room was full, veterans of 3 generations, families, volunteers, a few people who had simply seen the flyer and felt something pulled them through the door. Ava sat in the back row with Titan, who was exhibiting the dignified patience of a soldier who had heard this story before and approved of it entirely.
Samuel stood at the podium for a moment without speaking. He looked out at the room, at the faces, young and old, men and women, some in uniform, some bearing the invisible marks of service that only other veterans fully recognize. Then he spoke. "I walked into a storm," he said, "because I thought my mission was finished." His voice was steady and quiet, and the room was absolutely still. "I thought I had nothing left that anyone needed. I thought the men I'd served with were gone, and the woman I'd loved was gone, and the life I'd built was gone, and I was just standing in the wreckage of it, waiting for permission to stop standing." He paused. "I didn't leave a note. I didn't say goodbye. I just walked out into the snow, and I thought, finally, I can put this weight down." No one in the room moved. "God sent me a soldier," Samuel said, "and he sent me a dog." He looked back at Titan, who held his gaze with the composure of a creature fully aware of his own significance. "And they reminded me that the mission is never finished, not for us, not for the ones who carry it in their bones." His jaw tightened. There are young men and women sitting in dark rooms right now, tonight, thinking the same thing I was thinking nobody needs them anymore, thinking their best was behind them. His voice dropped. I'm standing here to tell you, as a man who walked into a storm to die and came back to live, that is a lie. That is the cruelest lie the darkness tells, and I know because I believed it. Several people in the room were openly crying. You are still needed, Samuel said. Every one of you. Your mission is not finished. Afterward, in the parking lot, in the long gold light of a spring evening, Samuel knelt down beside Titan. The dog came to him immediately, pressed his great head against Samuel's chest, and held still. Samuel's arms went around him slowly. He buried his face in the warm fur of the dog's neck. His shoulders rose and fell once. Then he lifted his head and looked at Titan for a long moment, the way a man looks at something he cannot fully name the worth of. You saved me twice, he whispered. Then Samuel stood. He reached into the breast pocket of his jacket and removed something small and heavy, worn smooth from years of handling. He held it out to Ava. She looked down at his palm. The Navy SEAL trident. His trident. Sir! Her voice failed her entirely, which was not a thing that happened to her often.
Take it, he said.
She shook her head. I can't take that.
You can. He took her hand, turned it palm up, and placed it there, closed her fingers around it gently with both of his old, scarred hands. Promise me something. She couldn't speak. She nodded. When I'm gone, Samuel said quietly, let him visit the next man who feels forgotten. He looked at Titan. He knows how to find them. He always has. Ava stood in the parking lot of the McCall Community Center with the spring sun falling across her face and her hand closed around a man's entire life of service, and she did not try to stop the tears. She had learned something in these months about what it cost to always be strong. She had learned it from an old man who had nearly died of it. She simply nodded. And Samuel Carter smiled, a real smile, the kind that reaches all the way up, and walked back toward the light. There is something this world does not say enough to the men and women who served it. We take the best years, we take the steadiest hands, the sharpest minds, the deepest courage. We send them to places they cannot speak about, to do things they cannot forget. And then, when it is over, we hand them a discharge paper and a handshake, and we send them home to the silence. And sometimes the silence is too loud. Samuel Carter walked into a storm because he thought his story was over. Titan knew otherwise. And sometimes, if we are paying attention, that is how miracles arrive. Not from the sky, not with fanfare, but on 4 quiet paws, through a blizzard, to find the one soul who has stopped believing they are worth finding. No soldier fights alone. Not on the battlefield, not in the dark. Not ever. If this story reached inside you and held something you recognized, if it reminded you of someone you love or someone you lost, or something in yourself that has been waiting in the cold for someone to come find it, then every story on this channel is a promise that the men and women who served this nation will never be forgotten here, that their courage will be spoken aloud, that their pain will be witnessed, and that their lives, every season of them, even the hardest ones, matter. Hit that bell, share this with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Because somewhere, right now, there is a Samuel Carter sitting in the dark. And